was little, my dad told me that Cheerios were donut seeds, and that if you planted a Cheerio, a donut tree would grow. My sister and I dutifully spent hours outside, digging tiny holes and dropping Cheerios in, only to be disappointed in the spring when no trees came. I went to my dad with my grievance, pointing out that I trusted him very much, but I could not help but notice that it seemed like he was full of baloney. "Oh, don't worry," he told me. "Donut trees take 2 years to germinate, so that's why we'll never see them grow. But the next family who lives in this house will be able to eat donuts for breakfast every morning, or at least as often as their mom says it's okay." My dad was a captain in the Coast Guard, which meant that we got to move all over the country. But we only ever lived on the water, so the map of my childhood looks a little bit like a poorly played game of ping pong. A little family boinging back and forth from coast to coast. I think this could have been traumatic for any little kid, but somehow for me it never was. I know it's because of the way that my mom and dad presented each move, like another big adventure. My dad never said this, but I like to imagine that he was so cool that big government people just kept fighting over him and trading him like a fancy baseball player. I always admired my dad and thought that being a captain in the Coast Guard would be the best career in the world. One time my dad invited my sister and I to join him on his ship for a 3-day journey from New Hampshire down to Baltimore. We were going to get to be like part of the crew, doing totally rad things like pulling a lot of pulleys and looking through spyglasses, and it's possible that I didn't have an entirely accurate perspective of what my dad did for a living. And after those 3 days, I wasn't any more informed than I was to begin with. My sister had a great time, which is awesome because she's awesome. She got to see whales and sit with the crew in the mess hall and even steer the ship. I'm glad she was out there representing us because I spent the entire 3 days in my dad's cabin, vomiting like a loose fire hose. I think all I successfully ate the whole time was 2 saltine crackers and 3 gummy worms. It was then that I learned how hard it must be to live on the ocean, and that I would never get to be a captain in the Coast Guard. I know now that what my dad did out there was probably really scary a lot of the time. He would be underway for weeks and months for a lot of my childhood, and I could have spent that whole time worrying about him. He had to save people's lives, fight drug traffickers, look for survivors after big awful storms, and who knows what else. But whenever my dad was underway, my mom would always be so mad whenever the weatherman would say, "This tropical storm will move safely out to sea," because she knew that my dad was out there and it wasn't going to be safe for him, not at all. But he was always so happy, bright, and supportive of us when he was at home that it never crossed my tiny child brain that what he did for a living could really be scary. I knew that if I'd asked him straight out, he would have told me because he always respected me, but that darkness never followed him home. When I was little, I imagined that what he did was give band-aids to clumsy octopuses and make sure that seabirds had a place to rest their little wings. The stories that I do know are the ridiculous ones, like the one about accidentally spilling an entire 2-gallon jar of ranch dressing in a huge storm as a bunch of men carrying their mess trays swayed their way down a ladder only to Charlie Brown one after another into a big pig pile of ranch. My favorite story was about how my dad climbed up to the top of the mast one day in the middle of the ocean and dove off into the water 60 feet below. He told me that the trick is that you have to aim for the horizon, to leap straight out into space so that as gravity pulls you down, it will complete the arc into the water, rather than having you kersplat on the deck below. My dad brought me a photograph of him mid-leap, looking like Superman. I immediately took this photograph to show and tell, and with full belief in the validity of my statement, told all the kids that my daddy could fly. I'm still not convinced that he can't. My dad believes in making things last, and really appreciating every single thing you own. We never had a lot of money for frivolous things, and we were always taught to get the full value out of every one of our toys. My dad's favorite toy was his Volvo 240 station wagon. It had over 300,000 miles on it, and an air conditioner that had never worked. There was many a summer day when we would be driving down the highway, the windows down and the heat on full blast. This was the only way to keep the engine from exploding in a column of smoke. The Volvo drove us across the country, our sweaty bodies velcroed to the crackling leather seats. In and out of the back of that station wagon went wet dogs, old towels, destroyed sneakers, sandy beach chairs, and coolers oozing with melted ice and old cheese. Years of crumbs were ground into the floor, and passengers would routinely cough up an anonymous pet hair that may have been floating through the atmosphere. When you wanted to open the hatchback, it wouldn't open, unless my dad would say, "You truly believed it could open," and then it would. I had a deep, abiding love for this car, in spite of its many faults, because my dad loved it. You could drive the Volvo directly into a brick wall, reverse out of the rubble, drive to a flea market, buy an antique mahogany clothing dresser, load it into the back, and drive it to Ontario without the car putting up a fuss. My dad tells me now that I'm a grown-up that the great secret of parenting is to be able to make a game out of any situation that might otherwise be torturous. When I was in 6th grade, we moved from California to New Hampshire. My mom and infant brother took a plane, meaning that my 8th grade sister, dad, and I loaded up into the rumbling Volvo for a pilgrimage. It really was a pilgrimage because it involved a lot of faith in my father. We didn't drive straight across, instead we took it at a zigzag. When we were in Death Valley in the 136-degree heat, My dad challenged my sister and I to see how long we could hold a single M&M in our mouths without it melting, and he'd give us a dime for every mile. Mine lasted 100 miles and made the journey bearable. How did I do it? Only my dad and sister know, and I'll never tell. When I started college, my dad retired from the Coast Guard and became a regional vice president for a leadership development company. He travels around teaching highly successful, brilliant people how to be good, mindful leaders. In his spare time, he resuscitates vintage racing bicycles, just for fun. The bikes he builds are in such perfect restoration that he could sell them for thousands of dollars. But instead, he gives them to friends and family and donates them to local libraries to sell at auction to raise money. He creates things only to bring joy into the world. Very recently, I asked my dad what the scariest thing was that he ever had to do. After thinking for a while, he told me it was the moment that he first had to let my sister and I go. He taught the two of us to ski when I was 4 and she was 6. In the first several days, he held us close to his body and all slowly scooted down the mountain together like a weird amoeba. Eventually, the time came that he had to tell us that we'd learned enough, and we could try going down by ourselves. He had to stand at the top of the hill, knowing that he had to let us go in order for us to be able to be our own people. He had to let us make mistakes, and that he would be there to support us when we decided to try again. Dad, as I was growing up, he always told me you were proud of me. You were proudest of me when I tried something new, and when I allowed myself the possibility of failure. Now that I'm almost 30, and I'm your peer and not just your daughter, I can tell you that I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you as a father and a person. Whenever I have to make a decision, I always ask myself, what would my dad do? I'm proud of the way you always assume good intent in others. I'm proud of your kindness, your compassion, and your unfailing belief in the goodness of humanity, even with everything you've seen and experienced. I'm proud of your generosity and leadership. I'm proud of how you have changed countless lives for the better and never asked for anything in return except maybe a good cup of coffee. I'm proud to be your daughter, but more than that, I'm proud that you are my dad.